We have a first, Mike.
What's that?
The first being I convinced you to buy another fountain pen when I'm the one that bemoans you for buying fountain pens.
More like shamed me into it, you mean? Not convinced. There was no, hey,
true.
you should do this. Just, how come you haven't?
It's like you have failed as a fountain pen nerd if you do not own. Well, I don't even know what it was. A Lamy Safari? Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was a Lamy Safari, which I've had my eye on a Lamy Safari for a long time. It's just never really found one that I really like. They always come in these crazy colors.
Yeah.
Well, as we record this, it is Fountain Pen Day. So I put together a little article on my website with a bunch of links and things because people have been asking me lately about how'd you get into this? Where do you recommend I start? That sort of thing. So it's kind of like 800 words and a bunch of links on like everything that I know fountain pen wise condensed into a short little thing. So I tweeted that out and that started a conversation on Twitter about Fountain Pen Day, and someone had posted a picture of a Lamy Safari that they had gotten. You mentioned that how it was a staple pen basically, and I said that I don't have that one yet, and you're like, what? You call yourself a fountain pen nerd? Paraphrasing, something like that. At which point, since it's Fountain Pen Day, I immediately went over to Pen Chalet because I know everybody's having sales today. And they did indeed have a sale on the Lamy Safaris, and I got the charcoal one, which I think looks pretty cool. It's like a matte black. It's not a shiny black.
With the black nib, too?
Yep.
So I think you bought my pen.
I did.
What nib? What size?
Fine, because the German nibs are a little bit broader.
Yeah. Mine's an extra fine. So we're close.
Okay. Yeah, I prefer, like, my ideal nib is a Japanese, like the Sailor that I'm using today, the 1911. This has a medium fine nib. That is perfect for me. And that is my experience with like the Koweikos and stuff, because that's a German nib too. Like the fine basically is the Japanese medium fine. Roughly. I know that every single one is going to be a little bit different, but so yeah, I prefer a little bit finer, but not super fine. And they had that one, which also, like, when I saw that, I had to get it because typically the stuff that's on sale in Pen Chalet, you've normally got like the extra fine and then like the broad and the stub.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you feel a lot of times you can get great deals on pretty decent pens, but you got to compromise in terms of the nib that you want, unless you want to collect a whole bunch of different nib sizes, which I don't really like to do.
Yeah.
I got my one place that I write it with these, and that's in my notebook.
Well, just to prove my point that this is a staple pen, if you pay attention to the chat here, there are people referring to having two, likely just bought a third. People have three. Like, so that's why I say, like, these are the pens that, you know, a lot of people start with.
Yeah.
You just kind of skipped the whole beginner tier, it seems like.
I did. And then there's another tier, which I may or may not have a pen coming from that tier.
Okay, of course you do, like between $500 and $5,000.
All right. Well, since we're talking pens, let me pull this up.
All right, here we go.
A while back, there's a guy named Jonathan Brooks, Carolina Pen Company, who makes these pen resin bodies, which are absolutely amazing. And he partnered with, I think it was Leonardo, and they made a, what do they call it? Primary manipulation pen for the Momento Zero Grande.
Okay.
All right. And they made 50 of them, and they sold out right away. And they decided to do another run at the same time that I finished Calm Inbox and was looking for a trophy pen.
Nice.
So this one is on the way. I got the Vesuvio, which is the red and bluish one, not the greenish one. That's the Stromboli.
These are slick looking pins. So here's the slippery slope I think you just stepped on.
Yes, I know.
In that when you start going down this acrylics path and starting to get into the designed bodies versus like the solid colors and the details, and you start looking at these pens that have the entire body as the design itself, like what you're showing me here, dollar amounts go up very quickly.
Yep.
And they're usually handmade and custom made, and a wonder to use. I've had these things in my hands a couple times. Like pens similar to this, not these exact ones. And I need to stay away from them. I'll say that. I like being able to make my mortgage payment.
Well, this was a very special occasion, I guess.
Yeah.
Like Calm Inbox was a really big deal for me.
Yep.
And so I mentioned before how I've stuck with this. I know a lot of people think like, well, you start buying pens as like celebrations of something, but then you just start buying pens because you find one on sale, whatever. This one just happened to align with me looking for a celebration pen for a course that is by far the biggest thing we've ever done.
Right.
It was kind of a tipping point for the suite setup and the business in general. So
sure.
I wanted something that kind of reflected that. So I was prepared to spend a little bit more than I normally would have. This was a little bit more than I was looking to spend anyways. But I have heard so many people rave about the first batch of the primary manipulation. And that is the first pen that, because I listen to the Pen Addict every week. I follow all the stuff that Brad and Mike talk about. That was the first pen where I was like, oh man, I feel like I missed out on that one.
Sure.
And so when I saw it come around again, because I actually emailed the company and what is that website I sent you? I don't even know how to pronounce it. Like it's an Italian.
Stylographica?
Yeah. I'm like, hey, so is there any chance you're going to get these in stock again? And they're like, actually, they're coming out soon. And if you want to pre-order one, you can click here to be notified. As soon as they're available, we'll let you know. They sold out in like 20 minutes last time.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, yes, let me know when they are available. And then like a week later, like, okay, they're good.
Oh, too fun. Well, you and I have done a lot with fountain pens. I, of course, run an entire membership community around analog tools. So we do a lot of that. I even ended up doing an entire fountain pen tour on the Twitch stream this past Monday. So that ended up being that. We didn't intend to do that. We were talking about like the different grinds that Nib Grinder can do, Mark Bacchus. So yes, You can go deep into this stuff. Chat's telling me to run away from the pens that you're sharing with me.
I was actually invited on Mac Voices
right,
with Jeff Gamet, Kelly Gamont, David Ginsburg, Frank Petrie. I'm forgetting people, and I apologize. Brittany Smith, but there were a bunch of us, and he started off by asking me a question about productivity during the pandemic and what had changed for me.
Sure.
And obviously, I talked about my pen and notebook habit being born out of that.
Not a habit.
And then
let's call it an addiction. Call it what it is.
Sure, but it's my hybrid productivity system. I'll put a link to the article I wrote on the Suite Setup back in May, and I looked at that yesterday because I was going to link to it with this thing that I published today, and every single word of that is still true. Like it's all exactly the same, and it's really sticking for me, and like I look forward to using it every day. So this is not going away anytime soon. But anyways, I started talking about that system, and then Kelly's like, well, what kind of paper are you using? And then it digressed from there. We did not get to anything technology related, I think, until about 45 minutes in. So sorry, Chuck, but it was fun.
We're going to turn the Mac community into, pen and paper nerds.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, fun times. Well, I feel like we should, set this one aside. We could do this, I think, we need to do an extra Bookworm stream, not a recording, just to spitball this stuff at some point. But we do have an episode to record.
That's true.
So we should look at our follow-up here. I've got a couple of these, one of which I have done and am in the middle of an experiment with, and that is to talk to my boss about shortening my workday. So these come from the book Shorter by Alex Suyung Kim Pang, if I've captured that name correctly. And the premise there is that I'm trying to shorten my workday up in the interest of seeing if I can still accomplish the same amount of work in less time. there's all sorts of reasons and background to that. If that's of interest to you, go check out last round and find more details on that in the last episode. So my boss was cool with this. So I am doing this experiment, not 100% all the way for what Alex recommends in the book, but darn close. So I have shortened up 3 of my days in the week and cutting back some nights and potential weekend hours that I've been putting in, because working nonprofit, hours are flexible and all over the place, which usually means always on. But I think we've found a pretty good schedule with that. And I'm in the middle of, I'm wrapping up my first week experiment on that. It seems to have gone well. So that piece, I would say, has been a success so far. The hope is that it would continue to go that way so that it can continue to operate that way, as long as I don't, start slacking off. Let's hope that doesn't happen. So that was step 1. Step 2, I was trying to put together like these shorter segments and trying to like force myself to jump from thing to thing a little bit. And I attempted to do that week 1. And that did not go well at all, because I think, I've been trying to figure out why. I think it was too fast and too far apart. So like trying to jump from one project to another, from writing to development and back to a different third project and do, say, social media of some sort. It didn't work at all. I was totally distracted and jumped way too far and never got it to work out. So what I have since done is, this past week, this didn't work either though. I tried to theme the days based on project. So like on day 1, I'm going to work on the Grythics project. On day 2, I'm going to work on Analog Joe stuff. So like I tried to do some of that. That didn't work out either. So either this is a failure due to Joe's ADD, or this just doesn't work for me. So,
or both.
It could be both. Yeah, it could be a number of things. So the experiment that I have left that I've not started yet and will attempt next week is using that extra time that I'm saving and doing themes based on type of work and letting it float projects as opposed to sticking to a project. I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but the theory would be do writing work on, say, Monday, do development work on Tuesday, et cetera, et cetera. Now, granted, I've got 3 to 4 different projects I'm putting that towards. So I don't know if that'll work out, but we'll see. That's the next experiment that I'm going to attempt.
This book that we're about to get into, I wonder what effect this might have in overcoming, because you kind of mentioned, and it sounded like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounded like you were sort of quasi blaming like the ADD switching shiny new object thing.
Yes.
Maybe you can train your brain to overcome part of that. Maybe not. I don't know.
Possibly. I have a tendency to, like, people who have ADD in their lives tend to say it one of 2 ways. They either have ADD or they are ADD. I'm one that tends to say I have ADD because I feel like it can be controlled and increased and decreased. It's my opinion. Not everyone holds that opinion. So
yeah,
I'm curious as we go through. Today's book will be interesting, but I think there is some of that. I think there's a little bit of what you're saying that's absolutely true. I don't know where the lines are though. Mine seems
I'm not trying to fix you or anything.
Yeah,
I just
no,
think
you're
it's
fine.
interesting that these tie together, and it might be cool to do some long-term follow-up with this action item after you've gone through this next book.
Right. Yeah, no, that's totally fair.
I got a couple action items here. Redesigning my workday. And that was actually one that was sort of in progress and I had made a lot of strides in. I feel like that one's going really well, and that is because of my consistent time blocking habit, which is sticking because of the fancy fountain pens and the fancy notebook.
Nice.
So there's my justification for spending all this money on the tools. But the next one was to build life admin into my work week. I am trying to do this, and it is a work in progress. I've made some strides here. I've talked to Rachel about this, and she's very much in support of it. She's actually kind of applied a version of this too, because she teaches for classical conversations, and so she has to put together lesson plans. And she's trying to do that during the normal school day as opposed to waiting till like Thursday evening and doing it then. Basically, we don't want to be working on anything work related we basically don't want anything to steal our attention from each other in the evening or our kids before they go to bed. But after they go to bed in the 20 minutes that we have before we fall over exhausted, we want to be able to be with each other and not have something that we need to do dominate that.
Sure.
And for the most part, it's working, but there is stuff still that's creeping up in there. Before we jump into the book, I do have a couple of things I'd love to share if you would allow me to do so.
Sure.
I've used a New Year calendar for several years. Last year, we worked with the New Year company to create a focused version, and the new version, the 2021 version, is now available, and it is dry erase.
Nice.
Which is the thing people asked for the most last year. The TLDR here is that David and I weren't sure how many calendars we'd sell, and it is significantly more expensive to set up the machine to print the dry erase ones than it is the paper ones. So we were on the hook for like 20% of the number of calendars if we decided to go paper.
Yeah.
It went really well last year though. So this year we've got dry erase calendars. They're $24. You can get them at newyear.net/product/focused. And I've got a couple of them here. I ordered one for myself and then a bunch to give away as gifts.
Nice. Nice work.
Have you ever used a New Year calendar before?
No, I've seen them. My wife and I do so much stuff digitally on that because it flexes so much. It's so common for us to have stuff change midweek or even midday, and then I don't know about it until I see her at night and we go through it again, and then I've scheduled something over time. That stuff happens quite frequently for us. Mm-hmm. So we've just built up a whole system of doing that stuff digitally. So we just don't have a good, as weird as this is for me to say, like we don't have a good analog use for a calendar system. So we just don't do that.
All right.
But,
I think you maybe should remedy that this year.
We'll see. Whenever I start changing the systems on Becky, she's not always excited about it.
Yeah, I get that.
It works. Why change it?
Yep.
I'm with you. I understand.
The other thing I have to announce is that David Sparks and I have done a thing with the Focus podcast. A lot of the relay shows have started producing these members only shows where they include some additional content at the end. And so we've done the same thing. We call it Deep Focus. And basically it's the normal focused episode with an additional extra deep rabbit hole at the end.
Nice.
So it started a couple of episodes ago. We had Eric Fisher on. He actually hung out for another 20 minutes, and we talked about how you actually plan your weeks and the tools that you use and all that kind of stuff, the nitty gritty. And then the last one that we did, we've been talking a lot about like these personal retreats and sabbaticals and stuff for a long time. To the point where people in the forum are actually getting a little bit annoyed by it. So David just got back from a personal retreat, the first one that he did. And rather than talk about it on the episode, I interviewed him afterwards and just grilled him basically like, what was the biggest surprise? What did you learn? What are you going to do next time that's different? You know, all that kind of stuff. So it's fun, and it creates a space where like we don't have to apologize for being extra nerdy about some of these productivity and focus topics. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can go to relay.fm/focused, and you would just sign up to support that particular podcast. And then it starts at $5 a month, or I think there's a yearly option too, just like with Bookworm. You know, you have the ability to support the show, and then you get some extra stuff. Our extra stuff just happens to be a separate feed with a little bit longer episodes.
Sure. Cool. Shall we step into today's book?
Let's do it.
This will be fun. So today's book is Brainwash by David and Austin Perlmutter. And I'll say that whenever I first saw this in my head, I was thinking, okay, there are So I've done a lot of research. I have a lot of background with health and pieces of eliminating toxins from your body. Okay. So I've done a ton of that because of my health history. And when I saw this, I thought, yes, I want to go through this because I want to understand their opinion on how you do that same process, not necessarily from your whole body, but with your brain. That was my initial reaction to it. I'm curious because I'm going to kind of flip this into, some of the last, few days when I've finished this up. I'm curious, what was your initial reaction when you saw this being on the list and that was going to be something we were going to go through?
I was cautiously optimistic.
Okay.
I looked up the book and I had never heard of this before.
Yep.
So I'm judging it by its cover, but it looked interesting. I also remember a couple specific books where, Joe, you done me wrong.
Yep.
So I was like, I hope it's not one of those. I don't think it's one of those, but we'll see.
Okay. Well, it turns out, because I did a little research on this, not a ton. I tend to not dive deep when I'm trying to decide what the next book is. Sometimes I have like snap reactions. It's like, yes, that's like the one I'm choosing for the next time is that. It was a snap decision. Sometimes it takes me a while of working through what it is that next one's going to be. This one, it took me a little while, but I didn't spend a ton of time trying to make sure it was a solid choice. But having gone through it, there are parts of it I like, there are parts of it I don't, but I think we'll get into those details. But I think there's potentially a lot of interesting points to pull out here. I will say I've been comparing this to a very large body of research that I have spent significant amount of time, probably well over 1,000 hours worth of time researching and trying to understand pieces right alongside with what they're talking about here because of the background I have in fighting Lyme disease and now coming towards the end of a mold infection fight. What he's talking about is like right up that alley between those two. So I feel like I have a lot of, background on what they're saying and can say yay or nay on some things. So hopefully that's helpful in this conversation. Hopefully I don't go down rabbit holes too much today.
So with that, I have to ask you, because I was talking to Chris Bailey and his wife, Arden, in a text message, he tells me, he's like, Arden couldn't stand that book.
Yeah.
And I said, basically, like, what was it, that caused her not to like it?
Yeah.
And he said that her main gripe was that she found the book derivative of a lot of other books in that genre.
Yep.
And so obviously she's got some experience with this subject matter, just like you have some experience with this subject matter. So what was your reaction to this book and the
holistically
material? Yeah. So like, were you like, oh, I know this already, this is really basic stuff? Were you like, they're cherry picking a couple things here, but they're not getting the whole picture? Or were you like, yeah, these guys are picking the right things and saying the right things?
So the trouble here is that they are trying to put together a bank of, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 main areas that cause us to have issues, I guess. I don't know what term I would use for that, but that cause us to not be operating at our full capacity. So they're taking these 5 areas and trying to give you a scientific overview of that area and then what to do about it. And because they are doing that in these 5 areas, it kind of has to be derivative, because I'm guessing, in this case, what Arden's saying is each of these areas is kind of a subset of what an entire book would be later, which is true. I would say that's absolutely true. I don't know. We'll have to see once we get through this, but I'm not sure that this is one I'm going to say does a great job of putting all of those pieces together. But that's partially because I've been through so many books. And so like I've got an entire book on the research behind Lyme disease behind me. Like there's just tons and tons of information in that from a health stance, but they cover more than just, food and exercise.
Yep.
So they're covering a lot more than that.
Now, interestingly, I asked Chris, I'm like, hey, you should ask Arden like what she would recommend instead.
Yeah.
And she recommends The Shallows by Nicholas Carr, which we have covered.
Yep.
The Upside of Stress by Kelly McGonigal. So we haven't read that book, but we've read a Kelly McGonigal book.
Yep.
Off the Clock by Laura Vanderkam. I can't remember if we did that one specifically.
We've done a Laura Vanderkam. What was it, 168 hours?
Yes, right. Altered Traits by Daniel Goleman and Alone Together by Sherry Turkle. So she recommended a bunch of books by authors that we've already read, but not the books that we have already read.
But here's the catch, though. To cover, like, in order to catch all of the areas that they're talking about in Brainwash today, you have to read multiple books to do it.
Yeah, true.
Which is very common for the books that we cover that try to cover a lot of territory. It's like, okay, that point that you're talking about there, we've did an entire book on that. Like, you're telling me to back off on technology. Fine, go read Digital Minimalism. Like that
Yep.
Sure, but they're talking about it in one chapter. So it depends on what you're trying to do when you're saying recommend another book. I'm not saying she's wrong. I think that it's difficult for me to... I haven't found a single book that I would compare this to.
Gotcha.
That's what I've been trying... Because I've been trying to think about that the last few days. Like, okay, what are my thoughts on this and what would I recommend people do? That's tricky because I don't think I have a solid book versus this. I don't know how we got to all of this already, but...
Well, you know why this is a compilation, right? It's because this is a systems book.
Yeah, this is kind of.
They are going to teach you a system to fix your brain.
Yep. So it's an interesting book. I'm not used to seeing this many different areas in one place, which I think is what they're trying to do. I have a lot of qualms with parts of this, but we'll see as we go through here. So let's dive into this because I think we can do our nitpicking as we go through it. But so it's broken up into 3 parts, but the last one doesn't really count. It's so small it like shouldn't be.
It's not technically another part, by the way, because there's no like new section that it goes into. It's just the chapters just keep going, and then it's like, what? Why?
Yeah, it's like, oh wait, here, let me throw one on the end. So I guess you could say it's 2 parts then.
Yeah.
The first of which is living under the influence, and I don't want to spend too much time on these 5 chapters here, Mike, because I think some of them overlap with each other, and I may skip 1 or 2 here, but I think that what they're trying to do here is just explain the problem, which, is good practice when you're doing something like this, is just here's what the issue is, and then we'll talk about how to solve it. And the first of those is to set the foundation behind what they call disconnection syndrome. And disconnection syndrome is one that I can't say they spend a ton of time on this. This is actually a fairly short chapter compared to some of the others. But some of the things that come along with disconnection syndrome. Oh wait, let me say this. Both David and Austin are MDs.
Yep.
And love their science.
Yes, they do.
So if you are not a science fan when it comes to like all the chemicals and neurons side of it, this is going to be a hard book for you. I'm a fan of that sort of thing, and I struggled with it.
Well, I am not a fan of that sort of thing, but I did find the brain stuff interesting, which is kind of the next chapter. So we won't go there quite yet. But I do want to just list the 8 characteristics of a disconnection syndrome.
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Because I feel like this might resonate with some people who are like, I think maybe I deal with that. Okay, I deal with that.
We all do to some degree.
Mindless activity, loneliness, chronic inflammation, instant gratification, narcissism, poor relationships, chronic stress, and impulsivity. And I think if you're honest with yourself, all of us can identify at least one of those that we deal with to some degree, maybe some worse than others. Maybe it's not that big a deal for you. they have a whole system at the back of this book where they walk you through a bunch of this stuff. And as they're going through that, I'm like, yep, I already do that, already do that, already do that. So I'm probably not the ideal customer for this book, so to speak, just because in some areas I've been doing this stuff for a while and it's not going to produce the dramatic difference that maybe it would if you're coming to this fresh. But yeah, this is all just agitating the problem at the beginning to get you on board for the rest of the book.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, there's, just calling it disconnection syndrome tells us quite a bit. I should also note, this was written and released in January 2020.
I noticed that they're referencing some really recent science articles. I'm like,
yep.
Really?
Yeah. So it's the stats and the research and science that's in this is extremely current. And
most of it.
Yeah. So it came out in January 2020, and it was fascinating to me to look at this book with the COVID background going on.
Yeah.
Because that
it wasn't
to be
that
released,
recent.
Yeah. So for it to be released in January of this year, they would have written it in 2019.
Yep.
And COVID wasn't a thing, of course. And
yeah, it's kind of terrible timing because they're like, hey, go build relationships in person. I can't do that.
Yeah. Which is like this disconnection syndrome. It's like, okay, well, disconnecting from other people is essentially what they're getting at with that. But we can't really do some of the stuff they're telling us to do as part of the brainwash program. Chat's saying that the foreword has conversations about COVID in it.
That's cool.
In the Kindle version. Mine does not have that.
Yeah, I don't think mine did either. I'm looking right now. No, they didn't mention COVID in the introduction to mine.
Yeah, mine either. So I assume that was something that was added for the digital version because they could. But the print version, of course, doesn't have that. But disconnection syndrome, let me come back to that. I would say it's a spectrum thing if they were to talk about it in that way, that you can have it worse or less than other people. So just know that. But they refer to disconnection syndrome frequently through the book, and that's the thing that we're fighting against that we need to wash our brain from.
Yep.
Okay. So that's that piece.
Hey, real quick, they also in the first chapter start to lay the foundation for some of the brain stuff. And this is the part that I found really fascinating, even though I'm not really a science person.
Sure.
I took copious notes during this section. So my MindNode file for this one almost reads like a science textbook. But I'm going to try to summarize this real quickly for people like me who aren't excited about the science, but kind of you need to know like how this stuff all works.
Sure.
So you've got the prefrontal cortex in your brain, which is responsible for your executive function. And then you've got the amygdala, which is the emotional center. And we kind of talked about this in emotional intelligence with emotional hijacking, how that can get reactive, fight versus flight, and just skip the prefrontal cortex. And so you're responding emotionally instead of rationally. And the point that they're making here is that basically everything in our environment, from the food that we eat to the devices that we use, social media networks, everything is designed to trigger that emotional response. And so they're going to, at the end of this, give you a system to help you kind of reset things and help you develop a more rational response to any sort of input or impulse.
I want to make one clarification from not necessarily what you said, but how you said it, in that they don't say that you were designed that way. They're very particular on it, and like they are way down deep in the evolution side of things. So they frequently talk about, and that's what a lot of the next chapter is about, is like how we evolved into things.
I gotcha.
Obviously, from our belief system, that's very like when I read that stuff, I'm like, that's not how that happened.
Your natural biological wiring, it's not equipped to handle the way most of us live our lives if we just default to the normal society and culture. It's not healthy for us.
Yeah.
So they're trying to give you things to fight back against that and allow your body to work the way that it's supposed to.
Yes. Good job. Yes. Do you have more on that you want to say? before I move on?
No, we can go into the mind-blowing part now with like the 3 brains and stuff like that.
Yeah, so in mind-blowing, it's a science lesson explaining how you have different, what they call different brains, but just different modes of action and different parts of the brain that do different activities. And they talk about the original brain, which is the piece that goes way back in time to like the almost like this is what we would refer to as like your reptilian brain.
The automated bodily functions, heartbeat, breathing, blood pressure, stuff like that. You don't think about these at all.
Yep. They're yes. The limbic brain is like your sensory input that drives towards your emotions. That's pretty much the basis of that. There's more to it, of course.
So this is the one that says, hey, if you are really, really cold, you go find a fire and warm yourself.
Yes. You're better at this. What's the third brain?
The third brain is the rational stuff. So the way that they talk about this in terms of the biology, and I wish they had pictures for this, but they don't, which kind of boggles my mind because a picture would be perfect.
Yep.
They talk about the original brain, like that's kind of like the brain stem and like the very lowest part of it. And then on top of that, developed this limbic brain, which includes the amygdala, the hippocampus, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the cingulate gyrus, they call it. This deals with hunger, pain, sleepiness, anger, fear, pleasure. Again, things that influence your behavior, but don't necessarily automatically trigger it. And then the third brain, this is the cerebral cortex formed on top of the limbic system. It gives you high reasoning abilities. You can think analytically and logically, problem solve, plan for the future, think abstractly. And this provides a counterbalance to the limbic brain. When you hear them describe it that way, you kind of understand how humans are different than like animals, for example. And they also mentioned, by the way, in this book, sapiens, which I don't know.
The thorn in your side.
We may have to read that one at some point. Because I feel like that would speak to this point that they're trying to make a lot better than they did. But basically, like this has got to the point where as humans, you can think about things differently as opposed to animal instinct where you just see what you want and you go get it. And they tell a story about Phineas Gage where he got this like railroad spike like blasted through his skull and it took out essentially the third brain and his personality like completely changed and like somehow he lived for another 6 years after having this like giant metal spike go through his head. But was interesting that it affected not his physical ability to function, but all of like the ability to control his emotions. He was a lot more angry and stuff like that. And then this is also where they talk about neuroplasticity and how over time like it started to heal and he started to regain parts of his personality back. Which there could be a whole book on that topic. That would be really interesting.
Yeah. Basically, it's a science lesson. But, there's a lot of stuff here, of course. We've heard the story of Phineas Gage in a lot of other books. It's not a new one, and I think maybe that's where like this is a synthesis of other material. But I think it's still good to have that foundation. Again, if you want the science behind it, this is it. So it does do that really well. But that actually sets itself up quite well for the following chapter, which is the brain's highs and lows. It kind of continues that conversation behind the science of it, but goes down into the path of basically how addictions are created in your dopamine structures. So your pleasure chemical, how does that increase and decrease in your body based on the stimulus that you're giving it? If you give yourself drugs, you can boost that up really high, but you're going to have that crash when you come back down. So you then need a higher dose in order to get to the level because your body adjusts and becomes used to it. But they go through the process of explaining how that can happen. Well, they don't get into the tech side of it until the next chapter, but they kind of set the stage for how this can be applied to things like your diet, to technology, to screens in general, to sleep, like their show, like kind of setting up the framework for that, as you can see, as we'll get into some things here in a little bit on how to break some of this.
Yeah, there's one section in here specifically on news, which I thought was fascinating. Even before the election, when I read this part, this section has some interesting research behind it. They mentioned that 95% of Americans check the news, 85% check it at least once per day. And then they talk about how the nature of news, the way it is built, breeds anxiety and chronic stress. The net result is that we see things in an unnecessarily negative way. And you only need about 15 minutes of news exposure to increase that stress levels based on the research that they did in college students.
That one blew my mind. That 15 minutes is all it took. Like, what? And then you think about how long with all the election stuff, how long have all of us been keeping our eyes on it?
Exactly. So I'll tell them myself, Tuesday evening, I avoided everything all day Tuesday. But at the end of the day, I turned on the news just to see where things were at, and ended up watching the news for 3.5 hours.
Yep.
And we still don't know, as we record this, what the results are.
Yep.
And I realized the next morning, I'm like, I just spent 3.5 hours yesterday watching this, and it did absolutely nothing. I turned it on because I wanted to be informed. I'm still not informed.
Yes.
I don't know what's going to happen. What was the point? So at that point, I resolved, I'm like, okay, that just does it. That highlights for me that nothing good is going to come from this.
No,
so just cut it out completely. It's not worth it.
Yep. I told Twitter, it's like watching the news won't change the news.
Yep.
And given how divisive our country has come and how little empathy we seem to have for each other, I told people on Monday, I don't think we're going to have a result for 2 weeks. That was my opinion on Monday. This is before the election happened. It's like, okay, well, as we're recording this, we're 4 days into this, and we still don't know. So I like, okay, here's my thought. The election results, my opinion, like I have opinions on where I feel I want things to go, but it's not something that rules my life. I don't want it to be that. So
exactly.
Tuesday night, I told my wife, I was like, if you want to turn on something and watch it, that's fine. I know even on a normal year, in years past, the result usually isn't out until 10:30, 11 o'clock, midnight, somewhere in there.
Yep.
I'm going to bed at 9 o'clock. I'll find out tomorrow.
Exactly. What else can you possibly do at that point to have any sort of influence in the outcome?
Yep.
Absolutely nothing.
Yep.
You did your part. You voted. Now just wait and let them figure it out.
let the machine work.
Yeah.
So I went to bed Tuesday night, woke up Wednesday morning, checked my phone. We still don't know. I went to work. People want to talk about it, of course. So it comes up in conversation frequently.
Yep.
But I'm doing my best to just stay. I check in, I don't know, every 5 hours or so just to see, have they decided how to count votes yet? So like that's that's what I've been doing. But people can tell, oh, did you see this? Did you see that? It's like, no, because I really don't care that much. So it'll come around eventually.
Exactly. You don't need to get yourself all whipped up into a frenzy because it's not going to impact anything other than you negatively.
Yep. Yep. And generally at some piece of the whole process, I'm going to be upset with, no matter what happens. So there's going to be a side of it that I don't like, and I'm okay with that. Like, I'm okay with having this conversation with folks who disagree with me. The trick is most people who disagree with me don't want to talk to me about it. So like, come on, I want to have this conversation. Like, just because we don't agree doesn't mean we can't have a cordial conversation about it. But it seems like most people aren't willing to do that. So,
well, here's the other thing I noticed from all the people losing their minds on Twitter.
It's so true. So true.
If your guy wins, how does that change what you do?
Right.
If your guy loses, how does that change at all what you do?
Yep.
And I'm seeing all these people who are like so depressed, and then they're so excited, and then they're so mad, like all over the place. It's just, I'm watching all this emotional roller coaster. And I never got to the point on Tuesday, even when I was watching it for 3.5 hours. It's just kind of like, I've been watching this for 3.5 hours. Well, that was a waste of time.
Yep.
You know, it wasn't like I was distraught and borderline depression or anything like that. But that's what I saw on social media. It's like, the world is going to end for me if my person doesn't win.
Right.
Like,
yep.
It's going to be fine, people. It's going to be fine.
Simple answer is put your hope elsewhere. That's
yes.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll leave that. So, brains, highs, and lows. Let's step to the next chapter, high tech hijack. And this is exactly what it sounds like. And I don't want to spend a lot of time here because we've talked about, I don't know how many books about this, The Shallows being a good one to recommend here for sure. And it's purely talking about how the technology that we use is specifically deemed or designed to keep us on it. If you want to see that in action, go to Netflix, watch The Social Dilemma. It will scare you into putting your phone in a box and locking it up. So that's really all I want to say about it. I mean, if you have more on that one, go for it. But
two things. One, they mentioned Tristan Harris, who we have talked about before. I think we first heard about this guy in Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport.
Yep.
But this is the guy who understood what impact Google was having on shaping the opinions and the thought patterns of the people who were using the tool, and said, we have a moral responsibility not to make this be negative. And they at first lauded him and gave him a new position, and then he realized that nothing he was saying was making any bit of difference, so he left. He's got a quote in here, which I liked, and they equates it basically to magicians and product developers who both try to exploit weakness in the human mind. And he says, quote, magicians start by looking for blind spots, edges, vulnerabilities, and limits of people's perceptions so they can influence what people do without them even realizing it. Once you know how to push people's buttons, you can play them like a piano. And that was interesting to me because I feel like he kind of falls into both of those categories. So he's the one person probably that I would listen to when they say something like that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, and I think it's probably true.
Yeah, Tristan Harris is the head guy behind Center for Humane Technology. And the Center for Humane Technology is the one that backed and put together The Social Dilemma. So yeah, there's a lot of connections there for sure.
Well, now I definitely want to see The Social Dilemma.
Yeah.
I don't have Netflix, but I may have to sign up just so I can watch it.
Well, I will tell you that Tristan is one of the folks on that, but there are a lot of like the ex-CEO of Pinterest and Twitter and Facebook VPs from back in the day. The guy who came up with the like button is on there. So there's a lot of big names and folks from way, way high up.
I wouldn't want to be that guy and have that on my conscience the rest of my life.
Doing a pretty good job of undoing it so far. So
yeah.
Yep.
There's one other thing they mentioned in this section, which I'm not sure if it's going to be relevant to our discussion. Maybe it is. It's definitely relevant to the rest of the book, is this time test. As it pertains to your technology, it should be time restricted, it should be intentional, it should be mindful, and it should be enriching. And I like that, what do you call it, acronym?
Yes.
The TIME. That, I don't know that I'm going to do anything with this other than I thought it was kind of cool, and it kind of codified something that has been in my brain for a while. I actually started on the Sweet Setup a while back, the Mindfulness Monday column. And when I did that, I was kind of curious, like, are people going to like this? Is this going to be relevant, or is this going to be something that, like, I published 3 articles and then people are like, I don't want to see this anymore.
Right.
But when I read this, basically, it kind of gave me a shot in the arms. Like, no, that really is important. That is a message that needs to be promoted. So
yeah, for sure.
Watch for more Mindfulness Monday content coming your way.
For sure. The last chapter in this section is called The Gift of Empathy. And this is where they shift in the book. Usually when you see a shift like that, it's at the change in parts. I thought it was interesting that they did this right before that shift. So they move from talking about the problem here and set themselves up for talking about how to break out of this disconnection syndrome by essentially talking about what the opposite is. At least that was the way I took it. I'm curious if you took it that way, but the way I saw this chapter was that it's, they start the book with talking about disconnection syndrome and all the issues that come with that, and they reference the flip side of that here, which is empathy and being able to see things from other people's perspective as well as feeling people's emotions, because they talk about two different types of empathy there. And I just found that very interesting and something I'm not real sure how I feel about it, in saying that the opposite of disconnection syndrome, being removed from other people, and then saying that the opposite of that is empathy and being able to, I guess, really connect with people. It seems like a good and evil opposite setup, but it's obviously, I feel like there's some potential failures in that metaphor there, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, one of the things that they mentioned for disconnection syndrome is narcissism, but in this chapter, they define narcissism as a lack of empathy. So I don't view it as good, bad. I view it as on a scale from 0 to 100.
Okay.
So empathy is the thing that you should have for people if your brain is functioning correctly. And in this section, they talk about how social media promotes narcissism because the relationships are shallow and they're focused on yourself. Daily TV watching, especially reality and political talk shows, promotes narcissism. And on page 71, they say, unfortunately, our brains are progressively reinforced to believe that we are the center of the universe and that getting ahead requires others to falter and fail. We've talked about that a bunch of times on this podcast, about how success is not a zero-sum game, where if I succeed, that means Joe has to fail. But narcissism basically views it that way. Even in terms of happiness, I would argue, where if I'm going to be happy, then Joe's got to suffer. And that's so unhealthy. And when you read this chapter, you realize that that's really the root of a lot of the stuff that's wrong in our society.
Yeah.
Especially as we're going through all this election stuff. Like, that's the thing that keeps coming back to me, is like, these people do not care one iota about anybody on the other side.
Right.
Both of them. They just want to trample them to get what they want. And in 4 years, when the voters get frustrated enough to go the other way, they're the ones who are going to be crying because the world is ending.
Yep.
Like, does this seem stupid to anybody else? Like, we just keep going back and forth. It's like, when do we get off this ride?
Yep.
When we care about other people.
Yep. It would not surprise me if you're on the red side, you get upset with the blue side. If you're on the blue side, you're upset with the red side. And it seems like whoever has the presidency, the opposite side gets really upset and they have high voter turnout. And then it ends up swinging to one way. And then the next time around, it has the opposite effect. So then it would not surprise me if we go through a handful of presidential election cycles and just flip back and forth. That would not surprise me at all.
That has been the historical model.
Yeah. But usually you have a re-election.
The incumbent has the advantage.
Yeah. Usually you would see that, but I don't know that that's necessarily going to hold true moving forward, but I don't know. Who knows? Yes, and those in the middle are upset with both sides, as as Blake says in the chat.
Yeah.
Absolutely true.
Well, any decent human is upset with both sides, I would argue.
Yep.
Your political views can be completely in line with one extreme or the other. That's fine, but like, have some compassion, people.
Right. Thus, the gift of empathy. So at this point in the book, we transition over into the second part, and it's called Breaking the Spell. This is where they begin discussing the tactics of their brainwash system. Okay? And the first of those that they discuss is, how do they call it? It's not man versus nature. Basically, go outside.
Yes.
Okay, there. Next.
Well, hold on a second here, because as we record this, it's cold in the Midwest. Pretty soon, it's going to be negative 60 Fahrenheit.
Yes.
with the wind chill. What do you do at that point? That's what I've been wrestling through with this, is like, I completely agree. And I have actually shared on this podcast, I think, how at the beginning of all of this quarantine stuff, I decided I'm going to get outside every single day. And from the middle of March until the end of September, I either biked or ran outside every single day.
Yeah.
Did not miss a day. Even when it rained, I got outside. But I can't do that pretty soon. So at that point, like, what am I supposed to do? Get a houseplant?
Well, yeah, I have a cactus somewhere. I know what we do. What we've decided is that if we're going to live in Minnesota, you have to embrace winter. There is no ignore it and wait until it's over, because you're going to have a lot of it. So we make regular runs to the sledding hills. We have a fair amount of, snow garb and such for the kids, and we go hiking through the woods. That's actually fascinating to see if your kids can figure out which way is north in a leaf deprived and completely white snow-covered forest. Like, if your kids can figure out which way to get back to the suburban from that, those are things that we try to do with our kids. Now, having kids helps because it gives you a reason to go out. Yeah, snowshoes is another one. So, like, doing things like that is what we do, but we are a very outdoorsy type family in that sense. We're hiking all the time. We do the mushroom thing. We do all sorts of stuff. It's just a matter of what do you do to set yourself up to make that a thing. We've made that a priority. Like, getting outside is a thing that we have made an expectation in our family. So it's a fascinating process to force yourself to go outside and go into scenarios. So yeah, when we go hiking and stuff, the chat's talking about survival tactics. It's pretty common for me to talk to our kids and say, okay, what are some things you can eat while you're here? And there are definitely things you cannot eat. And which ones, we talk about this stuff. I have no idea if they'll ever use it, but it's fun and entertaining.
So I agree to a certain degree. Like, a big section in here is how, like, nature boosts your mood, and they talk about how sun hits your skin and your body produces vitamin D. Vitamin D helps manage your serotonin. There are weeks, if not months, in Wisconsin where the sun does not shine in the winter. It's just gray every single day. So I want to know, like, how does that impact what they are telling me to do in this chapter? I mean, you're not far from me.
Right.
You probably experience the same thing. Like, you can get outside, but if the sun's not shining, I feel like, kind of, what's the point?
So they don't talk about this, because they talk about, if you're in areas, take vitamin D. Like, they talk about doing that. My specialist that's helped me through this Lyme and mold fight has tried to get me to take vitamin D regularly. And I continue to tell her no and don't, because we go outside all the time. Even when it's cloudy, you still get the benefits. They don't talk about that here. And this is one of my issues with it, because people don't realize that even though it may be cloudy outside, you don't necessarily have to have the actual sun beating on your skin to do that.
Okay.
So I disagree with that. I don't know if that's, if I've maybe gone down a research pocket and just want that to be true. That could be a thing too. I'm aware that sometimes you end up in these reinforcement cycles, and I don't necessarily want to say I'm 100% on that, but I know that in my personal experience, that going out, even when it's cloudy, that I feel like I've reaped the benefits from that. But that's possibly just me.
Okay. That's completely fair. But those are the questions that are in my mind after reading
Yeah.
this section is like,
And those are solid.
so
Yeah.
I'm supposed to take a relaxed walk through the forest when it's sunny, except in January in Wisconsin, it's not going to be relaxed because it's going to be negative 60 with a 30-mile-an-hour wind. So I'm going to be bundled up from head to toe.
Yep.
And am I still getting outside because I'm not going to see any of the green in the forest?
Yep.
And the sun's probably not going to shine.
Yep.
So at that point, like, how much benefit am I actually getting?
Yes.
I don't know. They don't address it.
Open a window and get a houseplant.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, they talk about a lot of these different, how having a houseplant goes a long ways. It's not the same as going for a walk under the sun in the forest in the middle of spring. That's very different. So it's not 100% the same, but they do make the point that using small pieces help.
Sure. Yeah, I just wish they would have gone into like how much the small pieces help.
Sure.
And how many small pieces do you need to equate to one big piece?
Yeah.
Because right now it's easy enough for me to go for a run, and there's a trail right by my house that actually goes through the woods.
Yeah.
And it's great. I love it. I'm 100% on board with the benefit of doing that. But I'm not doing that in 4 weeks.
Right.
Because I won't be able to.
Yep. Fun times. The next section here, because nature is a big deal, I think, we've heard this before, but I think, some of what you're saying, this is going to get into they're trying to distill a very big, broad topic down into a chapter.
Yep.
And that's going to continue here. This next one is one that I have researched for years now. Clear the table, your diet. This is a piece we haven't really talked about yet, but they talk a lot about the issues with the traditional Western diet and the extreme sugar intake, either through refined carbohydrates or actual sugar additives. So they talk about a lot of this. This is a thing where you may have to tell me to stop talking at some point. But this is a piece I've researched a ton. And the part that's refreshing to me is I feel like they got this right in the sense of what that science is doing to you. Now, they don't call out some of the things to combat it that I think they should. So I think they do a great job of explaining the problem, but what they talk about as far as how to solve that problem and what you should have as your diet, I disagree with in a fair number of situations, which is unfortunate because towards the end of this book, they have a large bank of recipes in this book. I did not know I was buying a partial cookbook.
Yeah, you made fun of me every time I bring up Leaders Eat Last, like, oh, that's a cookbook, right? No, Brainwash is a cookbook.
Yes. I was shocked. I should look this up. Well, I got it in the outline because I want to talk about it maybe a little bit later. Maybe we'll cover it now, but there's a lot in this I'm going to look this up now because I want to know how many pages. All right, so it ends on 251. Where does this start? Because they cover a ton. Because when I saw this and thought it's like 260 pages, like that's a decent sized book. But there's 60 pages of that as recipes.
Yeah.
So
there's also their previous books. I haven't read anything else by them, but I did have my parents came over, and this was out in the living room. We have this ottoman with like the circular sort of table kind of thing where we typically will put like the books that we're reading and the remotes for the Apple TV and stuff. And my parents came over and my mom saw it and she's like, oh, that's by the guys who wrote Brain Grain.
Yeah.
Or Grain Brain.
Grain Brain, yep.
And my parents are very, very adamant about like the evils of bread. I don't understand everything, but like they have a gluten-free everything diet.
Yep.
And they have been trying to get me to embrace this for years, and I have refused because I just love my bread.
Yep.
And I had the same thought because I knew this was going to be an interesting topic for you, and you would have researched all this stuff because of some of the things that you've had to go through. But I also know that you like to make bread.
Yep. Totally.
So is part of this just this is what you have done and you really like that process, or do you like have counter facts to combat some of the things that they're saying, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, I think their science is haphazard here.
Okay.
And I think that they don't go far enough on this piece because they go just to the point to tell you what not to do. And then they do have a lot of recommendations on what you should do, but they don't go deep enough into that from a science stance to show you the correct diet, which means that they end up coming short of where you should be. And a lot of people go gluten-free. There are a lot of people who should go gluten-free. But at the same time, what is happening is, and they talk about this to some degree, this whole body inflammation process, that is the root problem behind Lyme disease, which is, as we've talked about, the thing I fought for almost a year and a half and have since gotten past that. And in that process, a lot of the study that I've done is around whole body inflammation, and that is what you're trying to eliminate primarily through diet. And I will tell you that very likely 80% of my healing process was because of diet. And it was because I cut out all sugar. I cut out all the refined flour process. So the refined carbohydrates that they're talking about, I cut all that out. But the part that confused people for a long time is I make bread.
Mm-hmm.
I eat my bread every day, and it wasn't a problem. But the moment I ate bread somebody else made, it was a problem.
Okay.
So here's the difference, and this is why I think they come up short on the science. There is a huge difference in the way you make bread, in the outcome of the gluten content and the nutrient consumability of that bread. So whether you've made it with, say, baking soda, baking powder, or whatever, and made a white bread, that's going to give you this whole body inflammation and give you the issues that he's talking about. The bread I make is 100% whole wheat sourdough, and that is taking you back to biblical times and how they made bread. And when you hear, so if you read in the scriptures, they talk about unleavened bread. Well, that's just not putting the sourdough starter in it. That's all that is, which means it's just flour and water. Well, what I'm doing is I'm using a live bug to make my bread, which is what gives it the airiness and such. So anyway, all I'm saying is the process that I use to make my bread is one that will break down a lot of the harsh aspects of that flour that make it easier to eat. Thus, the issues with some of their recommendations. The chat's talking about Michael Pollan's series, Cooked. There's a book by him called Cooked, which is actually what sparked me to start making sourdough. That's been years ago now. So I would recommend that one. Michael Pollan is a very research-heavy journalist who likes to write, and his books are long. So he's very good. It's hard to refute him, but from a diet stance, I think that they have some of it correct. I would tell you, the alterations I would make to what they say is pay attention to fermented foods and adding old world grain methods to that diet. Because as much as people like to say gluten-free is the way to go, well, people have been perfectly healthy for thousands of years eating gluten, quote unquote, because of the way that they used to make it. And we don't generally make it the way that it's healthy anymore. So, but I will tell you that things like, donuts and such, Mike, they don't really fit in this diet.
I don't ever eat donuts. I'm good. All right. Well, I mean, there's some stuff I thought was interesting in here, but I don't know that I trust any of it anymore. So maybe we'll go on to the next chapter.
Sure. So the to wrap up about that, the thing that I would tell you is if you read this book, if you do everything they recommend, you'll be way healthier than 95% of folks in eating a Western diet. I will tell you that. I just don't think they go far enough. So anyway, that's clear the table. Then the next chapter is Sweet Dreams. How many times have we talked about sleep, Mike?
I don't know, but it's N+1 now.
Yes. And they continue that trend of talking about sleep. One of the things that I think was interesting in this piece, curious your thoughts on it, is they talk about basically the scrubbing process of actually cleaning the neurons while you sleep and how that is an important aspect of sleep. I feel like I've read about that before. I can't place if we've read it in a book on Bookworm or if I did it in my own research. Do you recall this particular thing from something?
I do not. I mean, I know because I have studied this subject a lot myself that a lot of restorative stuff happens, but I had not heard it described that specific way of scrubbing the neurons. That kind of makes sense though.
Yeah, and they do talk about how like some of the toxins, I guess, in your brain that are being scrubbed and removed are some of the same ones that lead to Alzheimer's and dementia. So if you don't want dementia, you should sleep more. That's what I got out of this.
Yep. I thought it was interesting that they mentioned as you get older, your brain has a diminished ability to clean that stuff out, which to me kind of highlights the importance of doing it right as soon as you can. Because if this stuff is just going to continue to build up over time, which it kind of seems to me it naturally would as your brain gets worse at flushing it out or less efficient at flushing it out, then you're going to prolong your longevity if you can take care of it at the beginning.
Yes. So I don't want to spend too much time here. Mostly just get good sleep. That's a lot of what they're saying because it does help with the toxin elimination process there.
Avoid blue light. They talked a little bit about that. I felt like this topic specifically, this was the one where I had the same reaction maybe that you did in some areas where it's like, well, they kind of talk about this, but there's so much more here.
Yeah.
This was really the only area that I felt that way, probably just because this is the one area that I have really studied of all the areas that they addressed in this book.
Yeah, for sure. And this, I think, is where like the concept of this being a distillation of other books may come in. Because like this next section here too, happy body, happy brain, go out and exercise. Like this is where it starts to get like, okay, this is fairly straightforward advice. They've got a lot of the research to back it, but I feel like we don't need that anymore. Like so many of the books and general research online tells you need to do some exercise, you need to eat right, you need to sleep well. Like this is very basic advice.
This is the point in the book where I was glad I took the notes at the beginning about what was going on in the brain, because this is where they say, oh, well, this reduces inflammation or this helps keep cortisol in check.
Yep.
And it definitely was slow going at the beginning of the book as I was trying to wrap my head around what all of these things are. But then when I got to the end of the book, it just kind of clicked as they're talking about these things. Oh yeah, I know what effect that is having.
Yeah.
So yeah, this specific section though, I feel like there's not a whole lot of new stuff here other than go exercise.
Yeah, and the next one's the same. Quiet time.
Yep.
We're talking meditation again.
We are talking about meditation again.
Meditation Monday. Or is it Mindfulness Monday?
Mindfulness Monday, although they would argue it's the same thing.
It's true, which it's not. But
yeah.
Anyway, that was a complaint. It's like, you guys are switching these terms back and forth, but you should not be. But that could also be, that could be one of those, if you go deep into this, like those of us who are into productivity tend to get upset when people refer to productivity as efficiency, when people outside of it are perfectly comfortable with that switching of terms back and forth. So maybe it's one of those scenarios. I don't know.
Yeah. There's not a whole lot of new stuff in here, but I will say that having gone through this particular section, they did sell me on the benefits of mindfulness, they would call it.
Okay.
I would say mindfulness meditation. And I understand that mindfulness really can be practiced via meditation using an app like Headspace, or Calm is another one that they mentioned. I've used that in the past too.
Calm was on the election results I forget what was
Yeah,
it MSNBC. Did you see this?
I did see that. Yeah.
I saw that and thought, whoever that marketing
Brilliant.
team is,
Brilliant.
you guys need a raise. And I went and I looked up the one of the Google deals to see how many times the search term of Calm app was searched for, and it was spiking. So they nailed that one.
There you go. Yep. So I actually have a Headspace subscription, and reading this again reminded me like, oh, hey, you got that subscription. You need to try this out again.
Yeah.
I have kind of rethought my iPhone home screen.
Ooh.
I've been playing around with some widgets. And so my home screen is just a couple of apps that I use every single day, which are intentional and I would argue promote mindfulness. Then the next page, and this is the only other page I have, it's all timery widgets.
Nice.
So I'm getting into time tracking using Toggle. That's it for the apps that are on my phone. Everything else is in the app library. But the, what do you call this? The today screen.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of widgets in here. One of them is for today's meditation inside of Headspace. One of them is for mood notes. And so I swipe back and forth between these three screens, basically. The home screen with the icons and the widgets, that's kind of home base. That's where it opens up. And then I can swipe to the left to get to the today view, or I can swipe to the right to get to my timery stuff. And when I was reading this, obviously I'm inspired to reestablish that habit. So kind of all this stuff is happening at the same time. I'm rethinking the widgets that can go on here. I realize that Headspace has a pretty decent widget. I read this chapter. They're like, hey, this really has a lot of benefits and doesn't take very long in order for you to start realizing those. So this is an action item for me to start meditating again using Headspace. And I hate that word meditating because there's a whole nother aspect of meditation, which I totally don't agree with, getting into like the transcendental stuff, which they kind of talked about here.
Yep.
But I don't want to touch that stuff with a 10-foot pole. I do believe there is value in practicing mindfulness, though. And that's one of the things I love about Headspace is that it kind of removes all of the other religious stuff from it. It's just centering your brain. Calm gets a little woo-woo for me, which is why I walked away from that one.
Right. Well, I'll throw another one in the ring because it's what I use, 10% Happier.
Yep.
And people balk at that because it's expensive, but I'm like, it's not that much more expensive than Headspace. But, you know, you look at it, it's 25% more. So maybe that's pretty decent. But I like that in 10% Happier, so that's the Dan Harris app, I like that they don't really go to the whole spiritual, transcendental side at all. They focus on just being mindful of now.
Yep.
That is like their one and only focus for that entire bank of app or of their teachings that come with it. So like that is one that I'm a big fan of, but I don't know that it's for everyone. They do the same thing. They've got the widget that tells you what's next and you just tap on it and it goes. So it's kind of nice for that, but I don't know.
So I'm curious because as I was reading through this, I knew that at one point you were using 10% Happier. And so my question was going to be, has that stuck for you?
It comes and goes. You know, I have periods. I've kind of jumped back into that in the last few days, I think, but I've had a period where I was away from that. I know that when I'm on that, I generally don't have as many ADD issues.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's only maybe 15 minutes a day, and it makes a big difference. Not day one, but like day 6 or 7 and beyond. So it takes a few days for it to have that effect, but it does seem to have an effect after that period.
Is that one of the things you track in your bullet journal?
It is.
Okay.
Yep. You know, where all great people track things in a notebook. Okay, that said,
we're just gonna leave that one there.
All right, so that's quiet time, and then we get to the system. And I mentioned earlier that the book that I have was actually a used book. I bought it on, I want to say it was thriftbooks.com, and this book had 0 writing in it until this point. And at this point, there is a 10-day, what do they call it? The 10-day brainwash.
Yep.
And there is a period of day 1 through 8. And the person who had this before me writes down the amount of time or the chapter that's associated with each of these. And it was weird to me that they did that, because after this, they do that exact thing. They spell out each of those individual pieces. So let me give you what this 10-day brainwash is, and then we'll talk about it. So the way that it works is you do a different step each day, okay? And on day 1, you are using that time acronym to keep an eye on your digital interactions.
The digital detox.
Yep. So it's a digital detox if you want to use the digital minimalism terminology. So that's day 1. You're going to do that on day 1. Day 2, you're going to focus on empathy. And they focus on 3 to 5 minutes a day to practice empathy. So that's day 2. And remember, you're just doing one of these each day. This isn't cumulative. You do one, and then the next day you do a different one. Day 3 is nature exposure. So they want you to go outside on day 3. Day 4, you're going to focus on your diet and have good food going into you. Day 5, you're focusing on sleep. Day 6, you're focusing on exercise. Day 7, you're focusing on meditation, which they deviate from mindfulness there. And then day 8, you're focusing on relationships. Day 9, you evaluate your progress, I think.
Yep.
Day 10, you make a plan for moving forward. I don't know about you, but whenever I evaluate my progress on something, by default, I'm making a plan for what comes next. Am I the only one that does that? And every time I'm evaluating what has previously happened, I'm already jumping to how to make it, how to set it up for the next one. Maybe that's just me being an oddball, but that was my thinking. I was like, why am I doing this on 2 separate days?
Yeah. So a couple things. Number 1, they really like that alliteration.
They do. They do.
Almost everyone. Figuring out food, successful shut-eye, embracing exercise. I was like, okay, this is a little over the top, guys.
Yeah.
The other thing about this, which I know you said you focus on one and then you go to the next thing, but I kind of think that's not a very good approach. Like the digital detox, for example, you could summon up all the willpower you have and you could make it through one day of a digital detox. And then you say, okay, there, I got day 1 done. I guess next one I can focus on empathy through gratitude. And you can instantly slip back into that stuff.
Yep.
So they have some great tactics in here. The digital detox specifically, they give a lot of specifics. Some of them, I think they take a little bit too far, like use airplane mode during meals and important conversations. I'm not putting my phone in airplane mode. It's on do not disturb.
It's
but
close.
Yeah, I agree with establishing the boundaries, which is really what they're saying. But I feel like some of the stuff they suggest, people like me are going to have that reaction where it's like, really? No. And they do say, apply this for yourself, pick and choose the things out of here. But that was one thing that stood out to me is day 1, great. We're going to get this thing started on the right foot. But if you take that approach where you then just focus on the next thing instead of viewing it as additive on top of what you're doing, I feel like you're sabotaging yourself and you're never going to get to day 10.
Yes. That's one of my core complaints with this is jumping from thing to thing just isn't going to, it'll show you how each of them works. Maybe that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
But it's not really a system that you can put in place and then stick to. It's a temporary system.
And they do talk about, to be fair, the taking stock part, they have a scorecard in there where you look back at the areas and you say, how easy is it to stick with this? Is it easy? Is it average? Is it difficult? I think those were the 3.
Sure.
So you could say, well, digital detox, that's really difficult for me. And at that point, maybe you set your plan going forward. But if I were advising somebody on how to do this, I would say, pick one small thing, make that a habit, then stack something on top of it. Maybe that's just because we read so many books about habits that the Perlmutters have not discovered yet. I don't know. Although BJ Fogg's a researcher, you would think they would hang out.
Yeah, that's their next one. They'll distill Atomic Habits into 4 books and then they'll put it out.
Yep.
So yes, I have qualms with this 10-day brainwash. It sounds like you do as well. I don't know what I would say to put in its place. Have you thought through that one? Because I feel like there's potential for something here, but I don't know what it would be.
I don't. And honestly, I'm not sure I would be qualified to without actually trying this.
Yeah, that's fair.
So this book is basically written in such a way that your one action item, should you choose to accept it, is to do the 10-day brainwash.
Yes.
So I was going to ask you, do you intend on doing this?
No, because so much of this, like their whole food thing, I live that way. That's normal for me. So when I got to that day, I would end up just skipping it. There are pieces of the digital detox, a lot of what he's talking about there, that's, for the most part, normal for a lot of what I do. The meditation thing right now is kind of just normal. I don't do the exercise piece, partially because I'm so active already. There are a lot of parts of that like, for example, yesterday, I had 14,000 steps on my phone. So that was just, I wasn't even trying. That was just an average day. My current average steps per day is 15,200. That's an average. So I know I've had days where I'm up over 20,000. So that stuff is just, I don't want to say simple. Sleep has been a priority for a long time. Like, these are things that are just standard. So trying to do a 10-day brainwash that helps, I think doesn't make sense. Trying to figure out how to do something that's a little more geared towards like strength in exercise would probably make more sense. Trying to be intentional about getting outside would probably be a good thing. I'm not one that's too afraid of going out when it's negative 20. I finished building the deck on our house when it was negative 10. So like, I'm not averse to that. It's totally fine with me. Growing up in Missouri, I had extreme temperature changes fairly regularly. So I don't know. Maybe I just grew up with stuff like that. I don't know. I didn't grow up with the cold. I grew up with the heat. But
sure,
I don't know. So no, I'm not doing a 10-day brainwash. I think if I'm to do anything, I may look at some form of like a strength exercise program of some form to bring into it. But that's really about it. I don't think I have anything specific. If we're jumping to action items here, that's not a thing that I'm planning. I don't have any for this, is what I'm saying. Are you going to do this?
Yes, I will do it.
Yeah?
I read
by
through
the letter?
this. No, not by the letter. So
Okay.
This is going to be kind of like what I did with the bullet journal, and I'm going to hack this thing to pieces.
Sure.
But
Sure.
I do like the idea of consecutive days. And I feel like 10 days, even if you missed a day or two, this is kind of set up perfectly for Bookworm, where I could start this tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I could go through this and report back next time.
Sure.
And there's stuff in here that I know I'm doing already. So some of these aren't going to take a whole lot of effort. Some of them are going to force me to pay attention to areas of my life that I know that I should have been looking at for a long time. Specifically the mindfulness meditation and some of the diet stuff. Now, I have a wife who's on board with this and wants all of us to eat healthier.
Okay.
So I think for me, it's like that particular section, it's going to be identifying what sort of dietary modifications I want to make, communicating that to her, and then making sure that we're agreed on like the meal plan going forward on what this is going to look like. But there's stuff in here that, again, is just kind of like the right thing at the right time. So I know, for example, a large part of being healthy is drinking enough water. And I know that I typically don't do that.
You drink your water over coffee grounds. That's how it
well,
works,
no,
right?
not anymore. I've got, this is a Hydrate Spark steel water bottle. It's a smart Bluetooth water bottle. And I'm going to see if I can make this thing.
A smart Bluetooth.
Yes. So watch
Water
the
bottle.
bottom of this thing as I hit the glow button. This basically is going to flash. There it goes. So it does that when you've fallen behind on your water intake for the day. That's one of the widgets on the today screen. It's how much water I have drank so far today. And this thing basically gives me a in-your-face notification instead of a notification on the phone like, hey, idiot, you should be drinking more water.
Sure.
And I've been doing this the last 4 days, and I have consumed at least, well, with my exercise, it always gets bumped up because it ties into the health app and it gives you a recommendation of how much water you should be drinking.
Sure.
So by default, it's like 80 ounces of water a day when I go for a run and bike ride, which is every single day. Pretty much it bumps up to like 90 or 100. And I've hit that 4 days in a row. And I can notice a difference in my energy.
Sure.
So I'm still drinking the coffee, but I am also making sure that I am drinking enough water. And I can see that this has a positive effect.
Sure.
One of the things I jotted down was like nothing but water before bed. So they recognize this, I think, and there's some things that, like you said, I'm sure I will disagree with, and I don't want to make all of the sweeping changes and just eat everything out of the cookbook that they provide at the end.
Yeah.
But I do want to start moving in that direction. And so my ideal version of this is like when I get to the day where I'm figuring out food, I'm not keeping everything in their list and everything else in moderation and cutting out certain things, signing up for the 4 supplements that they recommend. But it is making like one positive change to my diet for that day.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a lot of value in just like focusing on a different area every day, finding one thing that you want to change. I'm not going to get to like day 9 and then start thinking about all the changes that I want to keep going forward, like you were saying. So I'm going to totally blow this up and not do it their way, but I think I am going to do it.
Yeah, the piece of this I think that they should do is make this an 8-day brainwash. Like it sounds nice to say it's a 10-day, but those last 2 days are fluff in my mind. Because then you're not doing anything out of those 8 steps. And my mind is like, okay, towards the end of day 8, evaluate how it went, make a plan for the next day, and start 8 days all over again if you want. So in my mind, that's what you should do.
Exactly. So that's the other thing is like, this is not you do this once every 5 years or every year or whatever and clear everything out, which is kind of what I expected going into it.
Right.
I feel like the 8-day thing, like you were talking about, that's where the valuable stuff is. And you could do that and then make, instead of all of the changes at once, make like one change, create that as a new habit, and then revisit this next month, and then make one additional positive change. And I feel like if you took that approach, then this stuff could add up pretty quick, because the areas that they're talking about, I 100% agree with. I may not agree with every single specific in terms of the tactics, but
sure.
Like day 8 specifically, strong bonds, and they talk about spending at least 10 minutes connecting with another person each day. I think that's great. And I could totally see, like, if I'm going to track these 8 different areas, by the time I get around to this next month, I could say, oh, I started to let that one slip. I should refocus on that one. And I'm not saying I want to sign up for this specific model and, follow their 8/10-day thing on a regular basis, but I do want to give it a shot.
Sure. Makes sense. I'm not going to fault you for that at all. I just know that for me, I have a lot of these different, because I've had to be so specific with my health, just in general. And my wife has been fully on board with the diet and food consumption side of this for multiple years now, and is way beyond me. If you want to get into the details of what different types of food do to different types of people, she is your person.
All right.
She has done a ton of that. So I don't handle food at all. My wife does that. So anyway, what I'm telling you is actually not as detailed as what she could give you.
Sure.
So we've got the 10-day brainwash. They wrap this up with the brainwash recipes, which, as we mentioned earlier, is, 50, 60 pages of the book. And then there's a We Need You chapter at the end, which is just a conclusion, as you would expect, which I didn't really see much in there other than join us in this mission of brainwashing.
That was the weakest end to a book I have ever read.
Yes. I'm like, yeah. So we were talking about your action item of doing the 8-day brainwash versus the 10-day brainwash.
Yep.
And I don't have point blank action items from this.
All right, then it's going to be all me for follow-up next time.
Totally. It's all you. So style and rating, I struggled to read this at times. Being someone who's interested in the science, I got bored with it. I mean, I get some of that might be having come from a place where I've studied a lot of it already. So it can be boring to me when I feel like I've been there already. So that I'm aware of. I think that each of their individual parts are good. It's good information. I think that it's difficult for me to say that this is a book to recommend because there are so many others that cover each of these topics a lot better. And yes, I'm kind of joining, the Chris Bailey team and saying that we should look at other multiple books as opposed to this one distillation here. But I think you're going to be better off doing that. I think it's better that way in general. In this particular case, I, of course, don't think they went as far as they should have with the food side of it. I think they did a good job with the sleep and the exercise side of it, covering things very briefly. But that's the issue, I think, is they covered a lot of things very briefly and tried to cover too much in one book, which is weird to say because I feel like we usually have the opposite of that, in that we normally have a book that it feels like they lengthened it out in order to get it to their 200-page mark, 250-page mark. Mm-hmm. This one seems like they had to shorten it up. And then they threw this 50-some page thing of recipes on there. Why you don't just put that on a web link and drop it in, I have no idea. I don't know why they did that. That I just am baffled by.
Because it would be 160 pages if they took that out, and it would look a lot less impressive on your bookshelf.
I don't know. It's weird to me. So the format of the book is just strange. I think because of that.
Agreed.
As far as how to rate this, gosh, this is a weird one. There are pieces of this that are good. There are a lot of pieces of this that are good. There are pieces of it I don't like. I think it's not a book I'm going to tell people to go pick up and read just because it's kind of heady because of the research and science that's deep on it. But if that's what you want, this is definitely up your alley. I think I'm going to put it at 3.5 just because I'm so torn on it, because I think there are some good points on it, thus not going further down. But I think it's not that easy to get the actions out of it when we've covered so much already that covers those specific topics.
Well, you stole my rating. I'm going to put it at 3.5. But I also am a little bit surprised that you rated it that high without any desire to do the actual brainwash at the end.
That's fair.
So for me, I think I have to put it at 3.5 because I feel like there's probably some benefit that will come from doing what they tell me to do.
Sure.
And I feel like I have to just give it a shot. Like, I really don't want to do the 10-day brainwash.
Yeah.
I feel like most of it maybe is going to be a waste of my time because I've considered it already. But if that's the case, that's where I give myself permission to just do it my way and say, oh, I'm done with that. Check the box and move on.
Yeah.
And I don't have a lot of experience in a lot of these areas. Sleep is the one area that they talked about where I felt like, oh, I know this already. But a lot of this stuff, maybe the digital detox stuff too, I think there's a lot of things from that I have implemented already. But it's definitely an area worth looking at again. And so I feel like 3.5 at this moment, after I've gone through the 10-day brainwash, that could go up or that could go down.
Sure.
If we were to revisit the ratings.
Yeah.
I think if I were more solid on, I don't think this is really going to benefit me that much, I would rate it lower. If I was really solid on, this stuff is really going to make a difference, I would rate it higher. So it'd either be 3.0 or 4.0.
Yeah.
Just basing it off of the content of the book itself, I feel like for a sciencey book, it is pretty approachable. I don't know if it's just me, as I found a lot of the brain stuff pretty fascinating. So maybe like I was just interested enough in it that it kind of clicked for me, but most science type books, no, they really don't. I think there's a possibility that if you're not interested in that maybe you have a different reaction than I did. But I also think it's possible that maybe they just did a good job writing it and they piqued my interest as a non-science person.
Sure.
And that would be somebody else's experience too. I feel like this is a pretty easy read for a book written by two doctors. For whatever that's worth.
That is fair.
Yeah, and I don't think, like you said, there's definitely areas where we probably would disagree if we dug into some of the stuff. I feel like some areas I wish they would have gone a little bit deeper. I shared my frustrations with the It's Not Man versus Nature chapter, and what do I do as a Wisconsinite in the winter? But I mainly agree with a lot of what they said. And I feel like they do a pretty good job of combining this all together under the framing of, if you look at all these areas and you make some of these changes, what it's going to do is going to allow your brain to function better. And that is going to have these specific benefits for your life.
Sure.
If that's interesting to you, I would recommend it. If it's not, then stay away. I think there's definitely a portion of the bookworm audience that would just be like, yeah, I'm good. I don't really need to understand how all this stuff is affecting my brain, because even if I did, I'm not even sure which levers I'd be able to pull to make the changes anyways.
Right.
I work in a corporate environment and distractions are part of the deal. I connect with my family on Facebook, so I can't leave. If you're going into it open-minded and you're willing to look at these areas in your life for yourself, not just try to apply their approach, I think there's a lot of value to be had in here.
Yes. I'm with you. All right. I'm good to put it on the shelf. What's next, Mike?
Next is The Motivation Code by Todd Henry, which I have. I have not started it yet. I am familiar with Todd Henry because I have read his previous book, Die Empty, which I really enjoyed. I also am very fascinated by the topic of motivation and feel that it is much more important than willpower. And I'm kind of expecting that Todd Henry is going to tell me why that is the case, but we will see.
I have very high hopes for this book.
Me too. This could be great. This could be a disaster.
I have not cracked it open yet, so I'm very, very curious about it because motivation is the thing that sucks as an ADD person. So yes, I'm excited about that one. The one after that is The Practice, Shipping Creative Work by Seth Godin. This was released 3 days ago as we're recording this, and Mike texted me the link to this. I did not know it had come out. I saw it. I'm a big, big fan of Seth Godin. Even did some work for him on one of his sites as a contractor. So I'm a fan of Godin. So when I saw this, yes, that. I want to read that. And Mike was like, we should, maybe this would be good for a book. Yes, that I want it.
Well, I shared it with you and I kind of thought maybe you would pick it, but I was ready to pick it if you didn't for the next one.
Well, I win then. So yes, that's what's next. The question is, have you put one in between these?
I have, but I think I'm going to put this one on pause and read The Motivation Code first.
Okay.
But I have started Who Not How by Dan Sullivan, the formula to achieve bigger goals through accelerating teamwork. Dan Sullivan is the guy behind Genius Network. And what was that assessment that I took? Unique Ability. The thing that I had sent you, he was the creator of that.
Sure. I do not have a Gap book. We're not to that point yet. Maybe over the holiday season. I don't know. We'll see. So that said, for those of you who have chosen to be a part of our Bookworm membership program, thank you. That actually goes a very long way. I don't know if people realize that or not, but that helps us significantly with covering costs to run the websites and all the feeds and the community, which is club.bookworm.fm. So it does help pay for those. So thank you to those of you who are currently members. If you are not on that list, if you're not a part of that club, go to bookworm.fm/membership, and it'll step you through the process to getting to be a part of that. It's $5 a month, and you get some extra perks with it. You get a special Bookworm wallpaper. There's some archived Bookworm Gap episodes that I've recorded in the past. There's some cool stuff in there. All of Mike's MindNode files are in there. So there's a lot of extras out there. So if you're not a part of that team, join us. We'd love to have you.
Awesome. Yeah, regarding the MindNode files, this week I got caught up with them again. So it literally is all the MindNode files.
Nice. Nice.
I added 5 or 6 new ones, got us all the way up through the last book that we read, which I'm blanking on now for some reason. Shorter, right. So, yeah, thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for the Bookworm Club Premium members specifically. And if you are reading along with us, then pick up the Motivation Code by Todd Henry, and we will talk to you in a couple of weeks.